Welcome to Adventures in Solitaire. Today we'll be discussing D100 Space. As mentioned in the intro, today we'll be discussing D100 Space. D100 Space is part of the D100 family of games produced by MK Games and written and designed by Martin Knight. For the purposes of transparency, as I always do, though this is not necessarily a review copy, Martin Knight was kind enough to send this copy my way, and I couldn't not spend some time on the channel for this entry into the D100 series, especially given my love for all things sci-fi. If you are familiar with D100 Dungeon, then you will be well on your way to understanding the rules of D100 Space. If you're not familiar with the D100 system, then this is a great place to start. At the time of this recording, this is the first book in what is likely to be a long-running series of D100 Space games or supplements. It does make some noticeable changes to some of the core D100 systems, taking note of what's come before. I was very happy to see these here. But before I get too much further into what D100 Space is, I think it's probably best to hear from the author himself. D100 Space, a solo adventure game. D100 Space is a game in which you will steer a captain on a starship through a galaxy in search of fame and fortune. Your captain will complete dangerous operations, trade, mine, and fight fierce space battles across many star systems. With each game, your captain will gain wealth, recognition, and become stronger and increasingly skilled in their pursuits. All you will need to play D100 Space is a pencil, an eraser, a few dice, and your imagination. Can you survive the dangers of space? D100 Space requires a pencil, as it stated, a D10, a D percentile, and a D6. If you don't have a D percentile, then two different colored D10 will work here. I would also recommend that you take the time to print out the various player sheets and aids that come with the book. These can, of course, be downloaded from the MK Games website as well. The book will also teach you how the D10s work as a percentile roll, along with a few other basic and common gameplay concepts. D100 Space will then walk you through the character creation process, starting with your character's, characteristics. In D100 Space, you'll get to assign three separate values: strength, dexterity, and intelligence. You will get three preset values to assign to them, and those are 30, 40, and then 50. Strength will primarily handle melee combat and strength-based tasks or events. Think of prying open a heavy door or lifting a steel grate. Dexterity will then handle your range combat and deals with those events or tasks that require nimbleness of body and hand. Additionally, it might be worth mentioning that it plays a huge role in starship combat. So if you see yourself as a smuggler or a mercenary for hire, this might be worth investing in. And last but not least, intelligence. Intelligence will govern your skills in utilizing a cybercon, starship skill tests, and intelligence-based skill tests. We will cover the cybercon soon. Now I'm going to jump a bit ahead here because the next point is important. Each of these characteristics has a special ability that will unlock as long as you have a score of 50 or above in that characteristics. We will cover those abilities soon, but I wanted to mention this as this may be important as you continue on with your character creation. After you've chosen your character's characteristics, you will choose a career path. There are three career paths to choose from, which are Marine, Smuggler, and Techno. Each of these career paths grant a series of modifiers to your attributes and skills, as you can see here. These are permanent modifiers, and you'll need to update your previously selected characteristics to reflect these changes. You might be asking about the skills here, and we have yet to address these. Skills are similar to characteristics in that you will be rolling them at certain times during the adventure. These are more akin to knowledge than your physical characteristics. So they are very much more of a focused area of expertise. You will use skills when certain activities call for their use, or more specifically, you'll be using them during tests, which we'll cover shortly. You might also take note that some of the characteristic modifiers and all of the skills have a star next to them. This indicates that these are skills that your character is particularly adept at learning. These are the skills or the characteristics that your character has a knack for. When you would gain experience with those characteristics and skills, you will typically gain twice as much. So you really want to make sure that you pay careful attention to all the information here when creating your character, as they will have a fairly profound impact on your growth in these areas. On a side note, you will need to fill in the star on your character sheet for any of these characteristics or skills that you have chosen for your career that have a star next to them. After you've chosen your career and updated your character sheet, you will move on to choosing your race. As with careers, there are 3 races. Also, as with careers, each of the races will modify various characteristics and skills. They also have starred characteristics and skills as well. Once you have chosen your race, you will then update your character sheet to reflect the changes of these values, remembering to shade in the experience stars as shown for your chosen race. In addition to the skill bonuses granted by your career and your race, you also get to choose 2 skills that have not already received a bonus from your race and your career, and add +5 to each of these. These represent a couple of learned skills that were picked up before you started adventuring. These are not like the natural talents from your career or your race, so these are not considered starred attributes. When you gain experience with these, it will be at the normal rate. This finishes out the core of your character, and we can now move on to equipment, finishing touches, and the previously mentioned abilities. Your character will get to roll once on the weapon table and once on the armor table. You'll then get to record the statistics for those results on your character sheet. I was very happy to see the detailed descriptions on all of the weapons that you can acquire in D100 Space. There are a total of 3 pages of potential equipment to acquire, in addition to the list of armor that you can gain as well. Like D100 Dungeon, the number of equipment locations available to your character are more than adequate here. In addition, some weapons are not listed anywhere and are instead of randomly generated power weapons that have unique prefixes that define their unique abilities. These are rare and treasured items, and the number of possibilities here are quite immense. So even if you feel that you have discovered all of the possible weapons and armor for your character, you can always look forward to or even start your own search for the much sought after powered equipment. You should not be left wanting here. After this, you'll shade in 10 pips for oxygen, night vision, rations, decoders, and power cells. These represent the most commonly used supplies in your adventure. You will then add 3 med packs to your character's utility belt as well. While we're talking about utility belt items, there may be times while adventuring that you will be asked to perform a utility belt check. If you are required to do this, you will roll 1d6, and if the number matches a slot that contains an item in your utility belt, you'll then have to destroy that item and erase it from your sheet. Items on your utility belt are exposed and at risk. So moving on. Your character will also start with 20 health, 4 rep, 3 karma, and 3 light. In addition, you will start with 200 credits. This would be a good time to choose your character's name if you have not already. With that, it's now time to set up your first starship. Your first starship will be a fast attack craft class starship. This is certainly not the weakest ship on the list, but it is certainly nowhere near the size and power of some of the ships you will eventually have the opportunity to pilot. You will take all of the attributes listed on the ship table for your ship and transfer those values to your character sheet. There is one value that is dependent on your captain, however, and that is the control modifier. Think of the control modifier as your captain's ability to pilot the specific class of ship. The control modifier will change as your character grows or when they take over a new class of ship. More advanced ships are harder to manage and control, so your control modifier may even go down in value if your character is not advanced sufficiently to pilot the new vessel. Determining the control modifier is a pretty straightforward process. You will look at your character's intelligence score and compare it to the tech level of the starship you're piloting. You will then subtract the lowest value from the highest value. If your intelligence was higher, then you'll have a positive control modifier. If your intelligence is lower, then you'll have a negative modifier, as seen here. I think it's also worth noting that there are upgrades for your ship and captain that can increase the tech level of the ship and your intelligence values. When these are gained, you'll need to update your control modifier to reflect the new values. Additionally, there is one final thing that can affect the overall control you have over your ship. I think it makes sense that the more well-crewed a vessel is, the easier it would be to control and operate. So you get to add the total number of bridge crew to the control modifier. So if you had a -5 modifier and you had 15 bridge crew, then you would change your control modifier to a +10. Obviously, if you lose bridge crew, you would want to adjust the control modifier to reflect this change. We will talk more on crew in a bit. Previously, we mentioned abilities. We talked about how having a 50 in any of your character's characteristics would grant you access to an ability. There is one ability, as stated previously, for each characteristic. For strength, we have Mighty Blow. Mighty Blow allows you to re-roll a natural 6 on a damage dice in combat. You keep your original 6 and then roll the die again and add the new value to that original value. If you happen to roll another 6, you can then roll again and so on, keeping those values. So it's possible to chain multiple of these together for an exploding die effect for massive damage. This is rare, but it can happen, and it is nice to have. It is not that uncommon to at least roll a single 6 on a 6-sided die, and then get a roll again, and any additional damage is almost always helpful here. For dexterity, we have Perfect Aim. In combat, you'll be rolling every turn for hit location. Some of these locations do more damage. Perfect Aim allows you to re-roll once the hit location. This can help you have more consistent damage results, as some areas on the enemy that you can damage actually have negative damage modifiers, like legs or arms, for example. And last but not least, we have Cybercon for intelligence. The Cybercon is a cybernetic console that allows the use of cybernetic augmentations for your character. The console has 10 slots for up to 10 modifications and has different intelligence requirements for each of these slots, as seen here. You must meet the listed intelligence requirements before you can use an augmentation in that slot. Beyond being able to use the Cybercon to store augmentations, it does also allow for the use of 2 separate types of augmentations. Those that you store in the Cybercon, called implants. These are more permanent additions, not strictly permanent, but they do stick around after each use. All Cybercon implants require power in order to be used. Your Cybercon has a maximum power rating of 10. This is the value you start with. Each implant will state how much power is required. After you drain power from your Cybercon, you'll have to use power cells or some other method to recharge that power. This will also be important for energy shields in combat, as they also use power directly from your Cybercon. We'll discuss this later when we cover combat in detail. The Cybercon also allows the use of patches as well. These are one-time use augmentations. Typically these are similar to implants, but these are much more common and easier to acquire despite having a limited use. So this covers the entirety of the character creation for D100 Space. All that we have left now are the various rule systems that allow us to navigate space, wage combat, and explore the various structures or stations that we may find along the way. This is, of course, in addition to a few other systems like trade or character experience, etc. So let's talk about those systems in some more detail. Outside of combat, the majority of your roles will be making various tests against your character's characteristics and skills. All of these rolls will be made using a D10 and D percentile die. This is D100 Space, after all. All tests have a simple formula for determining success or failure. The test will first define the attribute to be tested, along with supporting skills that may be used in the test. If you have more than one of the supporting skills, then you may use all of the applicable skills. You will add together all of your characteristics and supporting skill values, and then apply any modifiers for the final test value. After you make the roll for the test, you'll compare your roll versus the test value that you have calculated just a moment ago. If it's equal or above, you have succeeded and passed the test. Each test will also have success or failure results, indicated by an S for success or F for failure. After you've determined success or failure, you'll apply the appropriate results from the test. In some cases, you'll have a slash, which will indicate a choice. So you will pick from the available choices. In other tests, you may have a comma separating the results. In these cases, you must apply all of the results from that test that are separated by the comma. While we're still on the topic of tests, a natural roll of either a 1 or 100 will always be a success or a failure regardless of any modifiers that have been applied, 1 being a success and 100 being an absolute failure. So there's always a minute chance of success or failure in almost any situation. Now might also be a good time to talk about experience, because as you are making rolls for tests or even in combat, there's a chance to gain experience in the characteristics or skills that you're using to complete the test or the combat rolls. Whenever you would make a natural roll of 10 or less for the percentile die, you can increase the characteristic you are using for the test or the skill if you prefer. You gain 1 pip for a characteristic and 2 pips for a skill. This is even in the rare case of a failed roll on a 10 or less. So success is not always required. This allows us to learn from our mistakes, and this is actually how we do most of our learning anyhow in real life. So this is a system that was used in the original D100 dungeon system, and I am still a fan of it here. In addition, if the skill or characteristic you're using is marked by a star, then you gain twice the normal amount of experience in pips. So you would gain 2 pips for a characteristic and 4 pips for a skill. While the skills sound very tempting to pick up, in almost all cases, it might be prudent to remember that characteristics are used far more than our individual skills. It might be quite some time before you use the skill that you are increasing. Then again, that might just be the perfect reason to increase a skill. Choices. Aside from characteristic and skill usage, there are a few other ways to gain experience or to improve your attributes. We can cover those in their relevant sections of the book soon. D100 Space also covers in some detail some of the item attributes before going into combat. On that note, in regards to handedness, in the weapons list there is a column for hand. This column will show either 1 hand or 2. This is, as I am sure you have surmised by now, how many hands it takes to wield said weapon. You will want to make sure that you write that weapon down according to its handedness on your sheet, so that you're not doing something like, say, wielding a sniper rifle and an energy shield. With that, I think it's about time to talk about the combat system for D100 Space. When your character encounters an enemy, combat will occur. Combat takes place over a series of rounds. Each round, both your character and the enemy will get a turn to attack or attempt an action. At the beginning of each round, you will roll a 10-sided die on the enemy reaction table to see how the enemy will react to your character. Enemies can become enraged when they are damaged. They can also attempt to escape when they are too greatly damaged. The most common reaction will be to simply attack the character. Once you've determined the enemy's course of action, you will decide yours. If the enemy chooses to escape, you can attempt to block the escape by rolling a block escape test. If you are successful, then you'll get a free attack on the enemy before the combat round resets to step 1. Failure simply results in the enemy escaping. You should then remove the enemy from the combat track, and we'll discuss the combat track shortly. Additionally, you may decide to escape yourself, in which case you would roll on an escape combat test. Success results in the enemy being removed from the combat track. You will need to add a note to the map to indicate that the enemy is still there and will need to be fought again should you pass through this room in the future. Failure to escape will result in a loss of 2 hit points, and the enemy will get a free attack on your character. Aside from escape actions for either you or your opponent, you can also choose to change your equipment around, such as swapping weapons from your backpack and your main hand, or items from your backpack to your belt. You can use an item from your belt, such as potions or items to help heal in combat. Should you be skilled enough to use a cybercon, you can use a cybercon implant or a patch as well. It's important to remember that your character only gets 1 action per turn, so if you want to attack, you cannot take any of these actions without sacrificing an attack. Should you decide to attack the enemy, which will be the most common choice here, then you will roll against the characteristic associated with your equipped weapon. If you happen to be dual wielding 2 weapons, and you can choose one of those weapons for the attack and use its required attribute for the attack roll. You'll need to roll at or below your attribute score for that weapon to successfully hit the enemy using a D10 and a D percentile roll. If you miss the enemy with your attack, You can proceed to the enemy's attack, assuming that you didn't get a free attack because the enemy failed an escape. If you manage to hit your enemy, you will roll 1d6 to determine where you hit the enemy. Remember to roll again if you have the perfect aim ability, and you choose to use it, of course. You will then roll an additional d6 and apply any damage modifiers to the result. Damage modifiers include the following: the hit location, the enemy's defense value, time track modifiers, item modifiers, and weapon modifiers. The resulting number is the damage that got through to the enemy's health, so there are quite a few ways to increase damage to the enemy. I also happen to leave out cybernetic augmentations that deal damage, so don't forget that as well. Should you be lucky enough to have landed the killing blow with your damage, it will now be the enemy's turn to get in one more attempt at a final blow. Remember that all combat in D100 space is simultaneous, so the enemy always gets a chance to take an action. If the enemy was attempting an escape and failed, they will not get to attempt an attack before the round is over, and you can then savor your well-earned victory. When it is the enemy's turn to attack, after you've failed an escape attempt, or after you have attacked, and assuming they did not try to escape and failed, you will then need to roll to determine if they successfully hit you or not. All enemies have an attack value, and it is this value that the enemy must roll at or under to score a strike. If they roll above their attack value, then they have missed and a new combat round will begin. When an enemy successfully hits your character, you'll roll 2d6 just as you did for your character when you were attacking an enemy. 1d6 for the location of the attack, and 1d6 for the damage from the attack. The enemy's modifiers are not quite as extensive as those that are supplied to your character when they attack. The enemy will typically have a flat damage modifier that you will add to the d6 result for damage, along with the modifier rolled on the hit location table. The result will be the amount of damage that is dealt to your character. Before you apply the damage, you'll want to look over your character sheet and see what damage reduction options you have before applying the damage. Your character has the following options available to reduce incoming damage. First, you'll check the damage location that the enemy rolled. If you happen to have armor equipped there, then you can reduce the damage by that armor's A or armor attribute. Additionally, some armor adds to your character's overall defense and has a DEF defense value. You will want to check your character's shared defense value on your sheet. This is the amount of additional damage that will be subtracted from the enemy's damage value. The defense value can never be higher than 5, so the maximum it can reduce damage by is 5. However, armor or items that give your character DEF or defense are pretty rare, so it's not likely that you'll be calculating this early in your character's career. After you've subtracted all of the passive defense from your armor on the location that was hit, and your defense value, should you have one, you will move on to damage deflection. You have 2 ways to deflect damage. Damage deflection is seen as an active ability and is something you must choose to do, unlike armor and defense values. If you are hit in a location that has armor equipped, you may decide to deflect up to 2 points of damage to the armor itself. This will cause the same amount of damage directly to the armor itself, so you'll need to mark that many pips off the armor's damage track. Should the armor have its damage track filled, then that armor is damaged beyond repair and or use, and will simply be erased from your character sheet. There is nothing left to be gained by hanging on to the armor at this point. Also, it is worth noting that armor can be repaired and it does cost money to do so, so you'll likely want to choose this option sparingly. Additionally, if you have an energy shield, you can choose to use it, regardless of the hit location on your character. The amount of damage that can be deflected is determined by the ES or energy shield value. For energy shields, instead of damaging the shield itself, you will draw power from your Cybercon's power reserve for each point of damage deflected. If you do not have enough power in your Cybercon unit to power the shield, then you may not use this as an option. It is very important that you have spare power cells if you intend on using an energy shield, especially if you are using your Cybercon for your augmentations as well. Stepping back for a moment to talk about enemies, most of the time enemies will not just be a name with an attack value and some health assigned to it. They will come with their own set of themed abilities that may complicate things a bit for your character. Crazed crew, for example, are trying to burn down the structure and cause damage, and they typically come in groups, so they will have the fire and swarm abilities, which grant their own unique effects. There are a couple of pages of any abilities that go into detail in describing what they are and how to handle their effects. So never a dull moment for the adventuring captains here. One of the newest additions to the D100 series, and D100 Space specifically, is the addition of the starship. While we set up the starship during the character creation, we didn't spend much time talking about what all of those attributes were for our newly assigned starship. The book does cover these in quick detail over the next couple of pages here, but I'm going to describe these as needed by the rules and move straight to the exciting bit here: space combat. And while we have covered ground-based combat, and now that we're covering starship combat, we have not talked about how these combat encounters occur. We will discuss this soon as well. Like ground combat, space combat takes place over a series of rounds. Performing combat maneuvers, firing weapons, and keeping defensive systems up and running consume a great deal of energy. At the beginning of every round, both the power level of your starship and the enemy starship are reduced by 1. If either your starship or the enemy starship does not have any power left in its power level pool, then you or the enemy will have to start deducting points from life support. If a ship's life support value ever reaches 0, then the enemy's ship is destroyed, or yours. I like to see this as damage being done to hull integrity that is in turn causing huge issues for the ship in regards to maintaining life support. I also think that it's worth mentioning at this point that in addition to life support being drained instead of the ship's power level, once that power level reaches 0, you can no longer power your shields once the power level reaches 0. So that means that all damage done to the starship will be going straight to damaging that life support. This is true for both your starship and the enemy starship. So the power level of your ship is an incredibly important value to watch. After power levels or life support have been adjusted for both yourself and the enemy, you will need to choose a course of action for your starship. For this, D100 Space has a tactical decisions table that you will choose an action from. This will both adjust your damage and your dex modifiers. There is some push your luck here, as you are not the only one that will be deciding on tactics to take every round of combat. The enemy captain will get a D6 roll on the same table. It is possible that if you choose to do more damage by, say, taking the -15 dex, the enemy captain may roll for a further -5 by choosing to target weapons. This would be a -20 to your dexterity when rolling for attack. Also, if either your starship or the enemy starship has 0 power level, then it will modify the enemy starship's roll. If your starship is at 0 power level, then the enemy gets to add 3 to their die roll when rolling on the tactical decisions table. The effect of this is that they will consistently be doing more damage if you fail your combat roll. If the enemy is at 0 power level, then the enemy is more likely to attempt to escape and will consistently be doing less damage. On the note of escaping combat, escape of your captain and his starship or the enemy starship can occur by way of a couple of different circumstances. If you and the enemy both choose an evasive maneuver, or roll in the case of the enemy, then the space combat is ended immediately. Also, should you choose the evasive maneuver and win the combat roll, which we'll discuss in a moment, then you have escaped space combat and it ends immediately. Also, unlike ground-based combat, you will not be marking anything on your map or anywhere else to indicate that the enemy is still there. They're simply gone, you've escaped. If the enemy chooses a maneuver and you did not, and the enemy wins the combat roll, then the enemy will escape, also ending combat immediately. Otherwise, if the combat roll is successful and the enemy has chosen to escape, then you will simply deal damage to the enemy's starship. Combat rolls are made by performing a single test, as shown here. This is different in ground combat in that there is only one roll made for combat, and that roll will determine the success or failure for that combat round. One thing that I think that is worth noticing here is the pilot's skill at the end of the test formula. Well, it's not a skill. It is the number of pilots that are on board your ship. When I first saw that crew was part of D100 Space, I was already very happy to see this. But when I found out that there were different types of crew that could serve in different positions on the ship, I was further elated. This really added an additional layer of strategy and balancing to the game. Okay, so moving on. Before we move on to how damage is calculated, there is also a potential for boarding actions to occur. If successful, these are very deadly actions that will likely result in lost crew. Given that you need these for starship operations, this can have quite an effect on your ship's performance. Boarding actions work very similarly to the evasive actions maneuver. If both sides chose or rolled for this tactics, then boarding will occur. If the captain chose this result and wins the combat test, then boarding will also occur. In the case that you chose this action and failed the test, then you will instead take damage from the enemy in the attempt. If the enemy chooses this action and fails, then they will take damage. If they choose this action and succeed, then boarding will occur. Like evasion, this sounds like a lot to keep track of, but because the system makes sense in regards to success and failure on both sides, you really only have to understand the principle of the system to commit it to memory. I think this works and was a pretty nice and succinct way to handle both of these events in space combat. Should boarding action occur, then space combat will immediately end and proceed with boarding combat, which will also proceed over a series of rounds. The first step of each round is the calculation of the boarding modifier. To get the boarding modifier, you'll simply compare your starship's life support value along with the enemy's starship's value. If your value is higher, you'll take the difference as your positive boarding modifier. The opposite is true if the enemy has a higher life support value. In this case, it would of course be a negative boarding modifier. Like the space combat test, boarding combat also has its own formula as shown here. This time around, it is the security crew that is taken into account. And I'm sorry, but that again is such a cool system for crew. Anyway, you will make your roll. This time it is versus intelligence. Success will cause 1d10 worth of direct life support damage to the enemy's starship, and failure will result in 1d10 to your life support. So while I did mention that you can lose crew, you may notice that no crew is lost here, but that is not quite the case. As life support is directly tied to crew and passengers on board, you can only have as many crew and or passengers as you have life support. So if you or the enemy starship are taking life support damage, you are losing crew or passengers as well. I can almost see the hull breaches or compartments that are breaking away from the ship as the crew are being helplessly pulled into the depths of cold space. Not a fun way to die at all. I really do love this system for its simplicity and thematic effect. Again, moving on. Do note that a 0 life support value caused by boarding will result in the capture of the ship that lost the boarding action. This is critical as it will be handled differently. We will address this in a moment. So let's go ahead and move on to starship damage. Like ground combat, you will roll a single 1d6 for base damage, then add any modifiers to that result. One major difference here is that you will add your weapon system value, or the enemies if you're being dealt damage, to the list of modifiers. After the die has been rolled and all modifiers have been added, you will proceed to reduce the damage by the opposing ship's shield generator value, assuming they have a positive power level value. The remaining damage is then dealt to the ship's power level itself. If the power level is reduced to 0, then any further damage will continue on to the ship's life support value. If, after taking damage to life support, and you would have more crew than you have in your life support value, you will then need to record the amount of lost crew on the compensation/escape pod tracker on the ship's log. You will be required to pay compensation losses during the port phase, which we'll discuss in more detail later. If life support is reduced to 0, then the ship is destroyed or captured. If this is your ship, then you are assumed to have ejected via an escape pod to fight another day. Your escape pod will then take you to the nearest space station on the map. You will also get the insurance value of the ship and insurance compensation as well. The value of insurance is half of the listed price on the ship table, so it might be wise to at least hold on to half its value in credit should your ship bite the dust. As ships are capable of being modified, which is a very cool addition here, you will collect half of the value of all your starship's modifications as insurance as well. So don't forget to add that in before you commit your ship to the eternal black of space. If you destroy the enemy starship, you can attempt to salvage the ship by passing the salvage test as shown here. All ships have a salvage value listed on the ship table. The salvage, as you can see, is not worth near as much as the initial purchase price of the ship, as it has been completely destroyed. You can make as many salvage attempts as you like at the cost of 1 power level per attempt. In the case of a captured enemy ship, you will have a little more to gain here, or really a lot. If you manage to capture the ship, it can be added to your log sheet and is worth half its value if sold. Now, note that I stated if sold. If that has got your gears turning, it should, as you can instead choose to take over the captured ship and claim it as your own. No rolls are needed for either of these options. If you choose to take over the enemy ship, then you will be towing your ship in for half the value. Also, you will need to record the new ship's current life support value and power levels to your log. The enemy ship is also assumed to have half its maximum fuel when you take it over. You can perform a fuel and power transfer from your old ship to the newly captured ship. You will need to use your power to restore life support first and then power level to the enemy starship. Your crew and passengers can be transferred, but ship modifications may not. With that, we have now wrapped up all forms of combat for D100 space, and we can move on to navigating space and interior sites like space stations or derelicts, etc. Starships have 2 modes of travel: hyperjump and space cruise. We will cover space cruise first. Space cruise is performed within your current star system. All star systems have a total of 10 zones. Not all zones will have a point of interest to interact with. We'll cover those briefly later. You will always start in Zone 1 of the star system that you're located within. I like to think of the first zone of the system as a known safe jump point for that star system. This might be a good point to mention that the galaxy is preset, meaning that you will not need to worry about randomly generating space lanes or star systems for now. We might have to wait to see what Mr. Martin Knight and MK Games has in store for us there. The book has a dedicated table for all of the star systems for ease of reference. When you choose to engage the space cruise while within the starting zone, Zone 1, you will need to roll a space cruise test to see if you are successful, as seen here. Success or failure will result in a loss of 1 power level. Success means travel to the next incremental zone. You can freely travel backwards and forwards between the zones. A failed roll will simply result in your ship failing navigation and staying in your current zone. If your ship is located within a point of interest zone, then you can interact with that point of interest. I will quickly display these here. But as you can see, there are a variety here, and each one has its own unique tests that you can roll against to interact with that specific type of point of interest. As you might expect, different crew types are used amongst these, thus furthering that hard choice of ship roster selection for your crew. But if you fancy yourself a mining ship, then you may well just choose to crew up for mining missions with various star systems that have mineable resources, for example. This leads us with hyperjumps. Hyperjumps can be started and attempted within any zone of a star system. When traveling between star systems, you must use the known safe star lanes for travel. Each of these lanes has a number listed between them. This is the number of light years between each system. Your ship can travel its jump speed in light years on every turn, so you will almost always need to complete several successful jump attempts before reaching your target system. The exception to this would be that you have a high tech level ship that is modded with tech that will allow for longer distances traveled each jump. This is not likely to happen in the early game. You will also spend 1 fuel for every 10 light years traveled. You can also choose to jump shorter ranges and attempt more tests if you prefer to lighten the load of fuel spent per jump. Like Space Cruise, you'll need to make a test. In this case, it is, of course, the jump test. Success means that you made your jump as programmed, and failure will result in a jump error roll. you will use the jump error table for the jump error. This can mean that you only traveled some of the distance instead of the entire planned jump distance, or it can result in a hyperdrive event, which will require a roll in the hyperdrive event table as well. This is great, as one of the things that we got to see in the World Builder supplement for the D100 system was events. I so wanted to see this as a core game mechanic, and now we have it here. For me, this just helped to take it that extra level for immersion. Back on the topic of fuel expenditure. I am sure you're wondering what I was wondering here. What happens if you fail rolls until you are on empty, stuck adrift amongst the star lanes? This leads us to the fuel scoop device that is part of every starship. Between jumps, you can make a fuel scoop test here to scoop fuel particles in space. I think of it as something similar to a whale taking its food in the dark of the sea. You obviously cannot go above your maximum fuel capacity. On a successful test, you can gain the amount of fuel indicated by your fuel scoop value of your starship. This also costs 1 power level to attempt. Failure results in the loss of 2 power levels as your crews frantically look for fuel without success. In addition to refueling between jumps, you may also use this downtime to charge your ship with the ship's power generators. This will also require a test and gives you the opportunity to restore some of your lost power levels. All power gained must first be added to life support if your life support has been reduced, and it is only then applied to your power levels. A successful roll results in getting an amount of power equal to your power generator rating on your ship. Failure will result in the loss of 1 die 3 power levels. On a side note to travel, as derelicts, space stations, or other space facilities are means of travel on the ground with your captain, we will be covering this, but we need to talk about some other concepts before we touch this. Also, when you're finished with your current session of D100 Space, you will want to record your current system and zone on your sheet so you do not lose track of your place in the galaxy. There are plenty of things that keep you busy in the universe of D100 Space, but in true D100 fashion, you can undertake missions, including the preset and much recommended tutorial missions. I would recommend this myself, even if you think you have the rules in the bag, as it can give you a bit of a leg up before you start rolling up random missions. These missions, by the way, are called operations. Because D100 Space does not just take place indoors, there are 2 types of missions: space missions and away missions. Space missions obviously have you undertaking treks across the local galaxy within the confines of your ship, and away missions always take place off of your ship, and you will be going at these alone. As long as you are partaking in the tutorial missions, you will be playing through operations 1 through 4. After this, you'll be rolling randomly for operations. Additionally, you can only have up to 4 active operations at once. When rolling for operations, if you skip the training operations or have finished the training missions, you can roll a number of times on the operations table equal to your captain's reputation value. Operations can only be completed once, so you cannot keep rolling and completing the same missions. You may want to be careful about which operations you choose to take on from those that you have available after rolling. As you fail operations, you will begin adding points to the failed operations tally on your log. You will be required to roll a single D10 every time you add to this tally. If you roll lower than the failed operations tally, then you will lose a point of reputation. So think carefully before you bite off more than you can chew. It might not just be your ship and your crew on the line when failing a mission. The good news here is that a failed mission can be attempted again. With that out of the way, it's now time to talk about away missions. Away missions are very similar to the current D100 system rules. Away missions will end when you have completed the mission goal, choose to fail your mission, or your character is killed with no way to resuscitate them through the use of life points. Away missions are carried out through a series of turns. At all times during a turn and when not in combat, you may adjust your equipment on your character sheet at will. At the beginning of your turn, you will fill in a pip on your time track to track time in your current away mission. You will then choose an exit to move through if more than one is present. If this is the first turn in the dungeon, you will start with a blank away mission map, making sure that the exit for the mission is at the bottom of the map. You will also need to generate the first area by rolling on the facility table. You will need to draw out the area on a map, including all of the relevant info for that area. We'll go over those details shortly. It is important to note that you will need to rotate your mission map so that the exit that you're moving through is facing away from you. The exit you choose will either have a door or will simply be an open exit or an open door. If there is no exit, you will step through it by generating a new room. In the case that it does have a door, you will need to roll on the door table to determine its attributes and steps needed to open the door. This may involve a variety of tests or actions needed to open it. You will also need to record the door info on your mission sheet, preferably on the door itself or next to the door on the map sheet. You can attempt to open the door as many times as you like, but most of the tests to pass the door involve the passage of time. Given that time is tracked and the supplies are limited, it might be best to move on if you're betting against the odds for that particular door. If you manage to open the door, you will need to erase the current door code and change it to O for open for future reference. Of course, once the door is opened, you may move on to the next area. There are a variety of primary door types, such as security doors, which require the right level of security passes to unlock. Well, that and a little luck as well. Security booby trap doors, which must be hacked to bypass. Welded doors, which are permanently sealed doors that will require blunt force, such as explosives, etc., to open. Remote doors, which require you to find security consoles to unlock them. Simple booby trap doors, you'll have to disable the traps or deal with the consequences. And finally, cybercon doors, requiring cybercon skills to unlock. Doors alone would seem to be enough here for any adventurous captain. Moving back to rooms, there are 4 different room types that are themed and will tend to have certain elements within them. Yellow rooms are empty. Green rooms are special rooms that have unique geographic features not present in other rooms. They will require you to roll on a geographic table for the feature and what it means for this area. As you can see here, there is a whole host of things that can be encountered and a great variety of tests associated with them as well. Blue rooms are objective rooms and can help you in your quest to complete the active away mission. Some operations require blue rooms to pass and others do not. If your operation does not require a blue room, then the room is treated as empty, with the exception to the search action, and we'll get to that soon. Finally, there are red rooms. These are rooms where an enemy is present. So you will be required to roll on the enemy table using the enemy modifier for the star system that your captain is currently located within. So each star system will present its own level of danger. Once you have dealt with a new room that you have entered, defeated any enemies, or dealt with any geographical features, you can then move to search the area that you're in. Each area type has a modifier that can help you with your search, as you can see here. Blue being the highest and yellow being the lowest. So even if you have an empty room, it can still bring some promise. Be careful though, as searches do not always go in your favor. One search may bring you a level of luck you didn't think possible, and another may well be the end of your mission. Prying hands, beware. We briefly talked about time before, but we did not discuss what causes that time to advance aside from when a turn begins. And we never talked about what ends a turn. After you have moved through an exit, done your door checks, moved to a new area, and finally searched if you wanted to complete that step, a new turn will begin, requiring you to tick off another pip on the time track. So there are a total of 4 steps or phases for a turn, in this order: time track advancement, exits, areas, and finally, searches. Also, you may have noticed that on the time track itself, there are symbols at certain points along the track. It is very important to pay attention to these, as each one has a specific meaning. Every 3 pips that you shade on the track is equal to an hour's time spent on the away mission. If your away mission states that you are operating without atmosphere present, or it simply states that oxygen or O2 is required, then the first hour of the day will always require you to remove a pip of oxygen from your character sheet. If you are required to remove a pip and cannot or choose not to, then you are in dire straits. The next time that you would be required to remove a pip, your character will simply die. So don't do this. At the second hour, you'll be required to erase a pip of night vision power. Failure to power the night vision, in other words running out of pips to erase, will cost you a -20 combat modifier to your attack rolls. So not a wonderful thing. You can shade the sun symbol on your character sheet should you not be able to remove a night vision pip to show that it is dark for your character. This will help you to remember to add the -20 combat modifier. During the 4th, 6th, 8th, and 10th hours, there are indicators for roaming enemies. At these times, you will roll a single D10. If you roll equal to or less than the indicated value at that time slot, then you will roll on the enemy table. This is for roaming enemies. Make sure to use the enemy modifier roll from your current star system, and then you'll engage in combat. There are a great many different types of mission objectives, from looting, collecting, exploring, kills, objective item targets, objective areas, in addition to unique mission objectives with unique and detailed rules. Each objective describes the needs and rewards for mission completion. D100 Space is much more verbose in its descriptions of what requests for D100 Dungeon. I really appreciated this in regards to the theme. Failure of an away mission adds an extra step in regards to bad events. Beyond tracking failed objectives, you will need to roll on the bad events table. I like to think of these as part of the cause of the failure, that one more thing that did the mission in. Remember that a failed away mission may be taken again. After the away mission is complete, you will need to reset the time track and any non-equipment related items that you are tracking with pips. You'll likely need to stop somewhere and pick up more equipment to refresh your stocks so that you can fill those pips back up again. The last thing that we need to cover in regards to the rules for D100 Space is the port phase. This is the phase where you will be accomplishing things that are happening between your missions or your personal side objectives, like mining. In order to start the port phase, you will need to be docked at a port or a military base. Ports cost 50 credits for docking fees, and military bases require no docking fees. When you manage to dock your starship, there are a large variety of things you can do. The actions that you can take during the port phase can be done in any order, and you can do them as often as you like, unless one of the actions would state otherwise. Additionally, some services are only available at military bases or ports. So I'll list the relevant icon for ports and military bases as we go through the options here. With that said, you can visit the medic for every 20 credits you spend for healing. You can pay the per pip repair cost to repair armor at an armorer. You'll likely want to visit the trade halls where all manner of goods and services are available. You can sell anything you have that has a credit value associated with it. You can also roll on the tables shown here, in any combination equal to your reputation value. The results will be the deals that you have been able to find. In other words, what is available to buy during this specific visit. You can also sell Cybercon implants at various rates depending on whether they have been installed. It is also possible that you may have to pay to have them surgically removed. You can buy supplies from the needed category up to a total of 20 items plus your rep value. You can pay to have training droids increase his skill by 1 pip for every 200 credits spent, a characteristic for 2,000, and your HP by 1 for 20,000. You can only increase a number of pips divided as you like, equal to your rep value. Hopefully we're starting to see the importance of your reputation here. A good rep will allow for a few additional strings to be pulled here. For you, sure, help yourself, Captain. While the trade halls deal in common goods, the cargo docks deal in bulk sales of commodities. You can spend time here to buy and sell those commodities up to the maximum amount allowed by your cargo hold. It might be wise to invest in a mod that extends the cargo of your ship, or maybe, just maybe, it's time to look at a new ship to haul all that cargo. Also, unlike the trade halls, all goods are available, and your location will dictate the price of the goods, as you can see here on the cargo table. Additionally, you might want to be careful as some goods are considered illegal to trade in some areas. If you decide that you want to trade in illegal goods, you will need to roll on the illegal activities test to see if you're able to get away with selling your ill-gotten goods. Speaking of upgrading your ship, you can visit the shipyard To see what ships and or modifications are available at this time, you can roll on either the ship table or the modifications table a number of times equal to your rep value. You can also sell your ship or ships here as well. This also might be a good time to fill up your fuel tanks, as the shipyards provide fuel services at 10 credits per unit of fuel. Costly, but a quick and effective way to get those tanks topped off. If you have a free slot on your missions list, you can visit the mission board to see what's available by rolling on operations. If you don't mind lending some of your life support to passengers, you can earn 100 credits per passenger delivered to their desired location. You can spend some time looking around the port for passengers needing rides to various destinations. You can roll a number of times equal to your reputation on the star systems table. The results will be the destinations that the passengers are asking to be delivered to. This is a may choose option here, so you do not have to take these passengers on. So if the destination is too far out or is in a risky star system, you can move on. Remember that taking on passengers has its risks, as you will be required to pay 50 credits for each passenger that you could not deliver due to the use of escape pods or passenger death. So that 100 credits can turn into a 50 credit deficit instead. In addition to locating passengers, you can also attempt to hire and fire crew members. The attempt is automatically successful, and you can get up to your rank value and new crew members. Also, when you visit port, you will be required to pay your crew a percentage of your earnings as shown on the operations table. So the more crew you have, the less you will earn. Having a large crew will help out tremendously, but it will also cost you quite a bit as well. This is another balance that you as the captain of your ship will have to take into consideration as you plan your trips and missions into space. Like passengers, you'll also be required to pay 50 credits for each crew member that required the use of an escape pod or that was killed in one way or another. So be wary here as well. You can also fire as many crew members as you like during this time. The last and final major set of rules for D100 Space are the rules for unforeseen costs. There will be times when something, well, unforeseen happens. This can be, as mentioned in the book, docking fees, lost crew or passengers, etc. When this happens, you are allowed to mark the negative value in credits that you would have in your bank. You obviously cannot buy anything while in a negative credit state. If you were ever to lose your ship in combat and are unable to replace it, the game assumes that you are well known enough to have any number of benefactors that are willing to loan you a basic shuttlecraft while you attempt to get back on your feet. It's not the biggest or shiniest ship on the used ship lot, but it will get you where you need to go at least. On a side note, unlike your own personal ship, you will not be able to sell the loaned shuttlecraft. It will be given back to the benefactor as soon as you have enough money to purchase a replacement ship. We have covered so very much here today, and believe it or not, I think it is time for final thoughts. So I had multiple talks with different individuals in the community desiring a space-themed version of D100 Dungeon. This is, or was, until now, a huge gap in the solo adventure RPG genre. I could only think of one title that really addressed this gap, and that would be Star Smuggler. And it is 40 years old as of this year, and so much has changed in the board game landscape over the last 4 decades. Having a space-themed adventure RPG was such a desire that I actually started writing up rules of my own to try my own hand at a solo space crawl of sorts. This would have been a massive undertaking. Thankfully, I do not have to worry about it any longer, as we now have a new gem at our fingertips in the way of D100 Space. So this is certainly a huge thank you to Mr. Martin Knight and MK Games. As stated earlier in the review and overview, Martin was kind enough to send me a copy of the collector's edition of D100 Space. To be clear, this is the first title that Martin has sent me, and all of my other titles in the D100 family of games are self-purchased. I purchased all of my titles before MK Games had released their collector's editions. I got all of mine hardbacked. But I absolutely loved the look and feel of the collector's edition. You cannot miss the golden spine of the hardback copy compared to my other titles. And the interior is full color as well. Now, all of the D100 books have color content, but they are color against a standard white page. The interior of the Collector's series of books are truly full color, and it really is just beautiful. I'm going to have to replace all of my hardback books for D100 Dungeon with the Collector's Edition versions at some point in the future. If you have the chance and the funds, I definitely recommend going that route. Okay, so moving on. D100 Space itself mirrors a number of systems that were first pioneered by D100 Dungeon. I think it best to think of D100 Space as not only a theme change, but as an evolution for the series. It has a few new concepts and has borrowed from not only what made D100 Dungeon great, but also what made some of its supplements or expansions great. When I think about my experience with D100 Dungeon, I've always had this wish for sort of a second edition, an edition that would take some of the must-have features of its supplements and included them in the main book, along with maybe a compendium edition of the current standing supplements. With D100 Space, we kind of have this. D100 Dungeon, second edition, but it goes further by adding a few new additions as well. In regards to D100 Space being just a reskin of the original, I have a few points on that topic. First, if you've watched the review or even listened to a few of the points already listed in my closing thoughts here, it goes further. And secondly, a retheme is not something to knock. Most of us, I think, will rearrange our living rooms or at least certain rooms in our home just because we want a change of scenery. Everything, for the most part, is the same, but we still do it anyway. Why? When we knock the fantasy genre or the science fiction genre and prefer one over the other, we tend to fail to see that often they're really just distorted images of each other. Personally, although I love both genres of entertainment in any medium, I still prefer science fiction over fantasy, even though I know they both cover similar ideas on story concepts. But even if it were just a reskin, I would take it anyway. But it is anything but just that. D100 Space gives us a second layer of exploration in the way of space travel. We have a pre-built galaxy, or perhaps local galaxy, maybe a sign of things to come, that really reminds me of the D100 World Builder supplement. The local universe is ours to explore. In regards to space travel, we have a very robust rule system surrounding what we will be using to navigate that space. A ship that can be upgraded in many different ways, along with a crew and rules for that crew to man it. We can engage in trade in a fairly major way for the first time in the D100 series. We also have a pre-drawn static map with plenty of points of interest to interact with. Each star system is unique and can give you some nail-biting choices as to where to go or what mission to accept, or even what trade goods to pick up and sell. Do you really want to buy those goods knowing where you will have to go to get a good return on your investment? All of this really helps to ensure that the map we have is very familiar from session to session and that it is heavily balanced as well, which is something that a random system cannot always provide us, or at least consistently. The magic system has been replaced with cybernetics in a way that I absolutely love. No longer are we taking health damage and choosing not to use magic until we get one of the few spells that we're willing to take damage or fatigue over. Now we use a rechargeable magic system that is a system of give and take in regards to risk and reward. D100 Dungeon certainly had its fair share of tables, and D100 Space continues that history and trend with new tables of its own. This includes multiple tables of events that include the good, the bad, and the neutral. I was so very happy to see this. I know when World Builder came out, I had wished that some of the event systems could find their way into some kind of second edition of D100 Dungeon. And here we are. They're here. Another nice improvement where what used to be called quests, now called operations, the quests or operations are very detailed compared to the original D100 Dungeon quests, and I was very happy to see this for purposes of immersion and theme. We now have a new character in the way of a ship that is modifiable and upgradable in a huge variety of ways, and the modifications don't stop there, as you can modify your weapons, armor, and even your character. There is so much to aim for here, and there always seems to be something to do. When I first started reading through the book, I remember hoping that it wouldn't just be a situation where I'd be piloting a single-seat spacecraft. I wanted to be able to have a crew on board as well. And then as I turned the pages, I realized that your crew played a huge role on your ship and in your decision-making processes. In regards to what the future holds for D100 Space, there is a universe of possibilities. We can likely look to MK Games' history to get a small idea of what might be down the pipe. I know that the world builder for D100 Dungeon was one of the best supplements to date, and I think it would be very interesting to see a sort of Frontiers expansion that allowed for exploration and discovery as a component to the game system. I think it might also be cool to have a few special crew members, maybe even named crew members, that you can have on your ship that would give bonuses maybe to the other crew or maybe to the ship, or maybe improve or change over time as well. Maybe even have a separate set of missions that you can do for those characters, almost sort of a crew as an additional modification option for your ship. Anyway, I'm obviously a fan of the system, and like all fans, I just want to see more of the system and see where the additional content heads, regardless of where that is. In regards to additional content, with D100 Dungeon, we had to wait some time to get additional material, but it seems at the time of its release, D100 Space already has additional content ready to go, thanks to previously existing concepts from D100 Dungeon. If you make your way to the D100 Space product section of MK Games, they already have the D100 Space mapping game, which allows you to do a near all-out board game conversion of D100 Space as you can see it here. I have been eyeing the mapping games for some time, and this will certainly be added to my list of eventual must-haves. In addition, there's also the D100 Space Game Tracker and the Implant and Patches accessories. So right out the gate, it seems like we are set with additional content, which I definitely cannot complain about. I obviously have a lot to say about the system, and I'm so very anxious about its future with MK Games. It is a step up on an already huge benchmark that was set by its predecessor in the D100 series. And like all of Martin's work thus far, D100 Space has a place where it belongs, on a shelf right next to my desk, where it will stay. So as always, if you have watched this far, or not, thank you so very much for watching. I hope to see you again soon. Thank you.